Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had so many questions. How do I record an episode? Where do I find background music? How do I get my show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other places people like to listen? Where do I find advertisers? The answer to every one of these questions is real simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, distributing, and monetizing your podcast. And best of all, it's 100% free and 100% ridiculously easy to use. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast.
Hey there, this is Denis Sunshine Bauer from Better Leaders, Better Schools, and the School Leadership Series, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com and get ready because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Instant Relevance Podcast. The Instant Relevance Podcast is an educational podcast featuring the latest news and resources to make learning relevant for all students. Follow us on Twitter at InstantRel. I'm Denis Sheeran, author of Instant Relevance, using today's experiences to teach tomorrow's lessons, and Hacking Mathematics, 10 Problems That Need Solving. I'm a math teacher for 13 years and an administrator for 6, and I am excited to be podcasting.
I am Raymond Steinmetz, co-host of the Instant Relevance Podcast. I'm a K-8 math instructional coach from Rhode Island. I write and blog about a variety of topics related to education and parenting. You can find my work at www.blendedlearningmath.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at blended_math. Welcome to episode 11 of the Instant Relevance Podcast. We have a great guest and interview for our listeners today. Denis and I interviewed STEM teacher, speaker, author of Codebreaker and the upcoming book Blockbreaker, Mr. Brian Aspinall. Thank you again for listening to the podcast. Please rate us and follow us on iTunes, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter at InstantRel. Without further ado, here's our interview with Mr. Brian Aspinall.
Buddies when we were younger, because there's no we don't have a Canadian dollar bill or a Canadian $2 bill anymore, just coins. So we used to go down there, try and sell American money to the Americans that came across, because they wanted to use their dollar bills at the strip club. Entrepreneurs we were when we were students.
Never miss an opportunity. We are excited to have our guest on the Instant Relevance Podcast today, Brian Aspinall, who is an educator, an author, a coder, and a maker who has been doing massively exciting things and sharing with the world. I would love to see what he's been doing, and he's been traveling around speaking to audiences, to kids, to teachers. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about what's new in his life and in his career, and what has been his passion as of late, and how it connects to what's relevant in his own teaching and learning. And I just heard from him that he is in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, which, I'm thinking Canada. He's pretty far away, way up there in the middle of nowhere. But it turns out that Windsor is 30 minutes south of Detroit, but in Canada. So it's just a reminder for me that I am not up on my U.S. geography to be, and it is about time for me to brush back up on that. But Brian, welcome to the show, and I'm excited to hear a little bit more about you. So why don't you share with our audience some of what you've been up to lately, and some of what's been exciting you as you move forward.
Thank you so much for having me on here. Yeah, the Windsor-Detroit border is one of the most popular Canadian borders. I live just outside Windsor, about 20 minutes outside the city. These days, I just wrapped up my second book. I'm really excited. We've got Hour of Code on the horizon, so my calendar is completely maxed out. And it's been really inspiring to watch this grow over the last 5 or 6 years, this Hour of Code movement. But I would like to remind everybody out there that it is actually Computer Science Education Week. I know it's kind of taken on Hour of Code, but lots of ways that educators can get involved in the next couple of weeks, and that's got me really excited these days.
That's great to hear. Any preview on what the new book's going to be about?
Absolutely, yeah. So almost an unofficial sequel to Codebreaker. The second book is called Blockbreaker, and it focuses on 21st century tools and technologies. There's a big emphasis on Minecraft as a tool for learning and how that was a really, really successful sandbox, if you will, for some of my students with learning disabilities. So it fit nice with the branding, the breaker, the challenging of the status quo, and sort of a metaphor on changing things and best practices to make sure all kids feel a level of success.
And Brian, you and I have connected in the past. I'm as the author of Instant Relevance. One of my major passions is finding those opportunities that kids are naturally passionate about or teachers are naturally interested in, and then extracting really valuable lessons and learning opportunities from them. And what we've seen over the past couple of years is that, Minecraft has been one of those things, and coding has been one of those things that audiences and students are naturally locked into caring about and being interested in. So I'm curious if you have a story or an experience that you can share with us about where you really saw the value of drawing from student passion into that path of least resistance for learning with what you've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of a spoiler teaser here. This story is actually chapter 1 in the book, and a story that really inspired me to put it together. I taught grades 7 and 8 here in Ontario, and so where I'm from, our elementary schools are K to 8 and our high schools are 9 to 12. So I'm sort of the end of the line in terms of elementary. And a student came to my grade 8 classroom a few years ago. He had a learning disability, he had an IEP, and he was autistic. And so for 10 years in elementary school, from JK to grade 8, we just sort of, pushed him through, if you will. The system really didn't allow for him to feel those levels of success. I mean, trying to get anything out of him academically, we knew he was capable, but what he wouldn't demonstrate, So his report card, in my opinion, his report card didn't really resemble what we really knew he was capable of. He just wasn't producing anything, so to speak. Long story short, his parents came in early on in that school year, and they said, our son has 1 million pieces of Lego at home, and we can pick any piece at random, and he can tell us what kit it belongs to. We know he's brilliant. He's gifted LD. Can we figure this out before he goes to high school? Is there something we can do? And that really, really flicked the switch for me. I thought, I'm going to try block coding with him. And that was really challenging and a bit frustrating for him. But then we ended up almost accidentally falling into that Minecraft space. And he'd never played Minecraft before. He had a school board provided device because of his IEP. And so he had an iPad. And so what we did is we installed Minecraft Pocket Edition on there. And he was beaming from ear to ear. He absolutely loved that as a tool for learning so much. His mom emailed me during the book fair and said, I have no idea what's happening, but he's asking me for money to buy books. My son has never bought books before, in his 10 years of elementary school. And I said, oh, that's great. Come into the book fair and let's see what he wants. Well, there's 3 books on Minecraft that he wanted. And so we were able to get all kinds of language arts curriculum and all kinds of math curriculum demonstrated in that virtual world, so much so that we actually wrote Minecraft as a tool for learning into his IEP before we sent him to high school.
That's incredible. That's definitely the first time I've ever heard of Minecraft being put into an IEP.
Me too, but I think I'm going to use that one.
I want to believe that we were one of the first to do it, and it wasn't my idea. My administrator said, well, I mean, it's a legal document. Let's get this thing hammered down, and all of a sudden he can use his device and he can use Minecraft during a math exam, for example. If he's doing, say, measurement or volume or area or patterning, all of those pieces can be done in the Minecraft space.
That's unbelievable. I've definitely never heard anything like that. I guess my question, after hearing such a great experience, I think that as educators, we know the power of a lot of these programs. We know that, the workforce is going, 100% tech enabled. We know that our students are going to have to, analyze and interpret situations with technology in their futures. Yet, in this test-heavy world that we have, how do you often kind of justify the costs of some of these programs when, you have schools kind of looking at math data, looking at, ELA data, and programs like this that have such a huge reach and reach so many students that might not have normally been reached, don't necessarily, you can't always, go and look at the math data and say, oh, this was because we have a good computer science program, or, a lot of these things aren't necessarily, the cost isn't justifiable, the same way that other things in education are justifiable. I guess my question to you is, how do you justify to kind of the people in charge that, these programs are beneficial, and, you can tell a story like the one that you just told, but, for people who are crunching numbers and looking at the cost of these things, how do you usually justify the need for these types of programs when it's really not always that easy to see the impact?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to this. I think number one, in the last 10, 15, 20 years in education, we've completely shifted the way we instruct our lessons. That's a generalization. I mean, project-based learning's been around forever, but when you actually look at what's happening in education, it's really moved tremendously in a very short period of time, but we've done absolutely nothing to change our evaluation practices. We've got the throwing out grades movement, which is a wonderful thing focusing on feedback, but until we change anything at a system level, worksheets will prevail because they're very, very easy to mark. At my former school, we decided to go gradeless. I mean, we have to do report cards, but we stopped putting grades on kids' work, and we stopped caring about data because you could worry about data till you're blue in the face, and there's so many variables to consider and bias and all of those pieces connected to standardized testing that we said, let the data be the data. If we have engaged kids, then I'm optimistic our data is going to go up. So we just stopped talking about that, and that made people feel comfortable that they no longer had to fill a mark book per se. They recognized that feedback on a Google Classroom or a Google Doc was okay, and that you could quantify that at a later date. And so the more we stopped caring, so to speak, about the grades and focusing solely on kids moving, we had this idea that if you never tell a grade 2 student they're a level 2 in math, maybe they won't grow up and hate math as long as you just keep them moving. And so the more and more we started to do that, the less and less we started photocopying. And as goofy as this sounds, when I started at that school, we had a $15,000 a year printing budget. That's ink, paper, X, Y, and Z. Teachers are given their stack of paper and they can only use that for the year. And, teachers are stealing paper from other teachers. And if they find it in the photocopier, man, that was a gold mine, especially if you found the yellow paper, because that's really expensive. So anyway, we went from $15,000 a year printing costs in 3 years' time to $3,000 a year. So we'd end up saving almost $10,000 a year for the first 3 years of this program, which allowed us to purchase technology, which is a more sustainable approach. Your printing budget's good for 1 year. You school iPads, well, you might get 3 years out of them, and all the apps that we continue to put on there. And what happened here is we started to use the kids. I don't want to say use the kids, but it became that grassroots movement. Our neighboring schools started to hear about it. Our high school started to hear about it. And over the course of 5 years after we had implemented this, our high school that we fed to was reporting to us that it was our former students that were now the leaders of their building when compared to the 3 or 4 feeder schools that were there. And when we surveyed the students about it, they felt that tools, like Scratch, like Minecraft, allowed them to become those independent problem-solving risk takers. So we had this idea that there's too much risk in not getting the grades. So why don't we remove the grade from the kids' work and focus solely on exactly what they're doing? Now, that was about 5 or 6 years. That was about a 5 or 6 year plan, but it really, really allowed us to have really deep pedagogical conversations about why. Why are we photocopying these worksheets versus why are we using Minecraft as a tool for learning? And we had, of course, our own anecdotal sort of concrete evidence.
So I think what you just said is really important to think about too. I get a lot of conversations with teachers about we can't drop grades right away. Our kids need grades. Colleges need grades for all this stuff. And it's a reminder that, there are things that you need to understand, that you're not just going to stop measuring what kids are learning. You're going to do it through a different lens, and it's going to take time. This is a process that we should map out and plan out and think about. And you made a really cool intentional or accidental shift backwards when you said that, we just kind of let the data speak for itself and forget the data, which is interesting because you hear the phrase data-driven instruction all the time. And that's kind of leading the way in a lot of places. But what you're advocating for in a positive way is like instruction-informed data. Just the data's on the backside. It's just telling us what we're doing, and it's telling us what our kids know. And so that's great. And so instead of using it up front all the time to try to constantly push forward on those numbers, it makes a big difference in our kids' mindsets when they think, I'm just learning things and this is exciting, and if I can learn through this way, I'll be able to do it. And my own kids play Minecraft all the time. My son's super into Roblox. I don't know if you've been on that one yet, but
oh yeah,
those are free games. He doesn't have to pay a thing for them. So to even jump back to what Raymond asked, it's not everything has a need for a cost. We can start off with the tester version as we're going through our guinea pig moments with the kids to see if these things actually work in their classrooms or not. And then, if the investment is necessary, we have some evidence to back it up. But one of the things that we all three have in common here is our math education background. And I know that's been a big part of your past and your teaching. And so I have a question for you about the future of math education, because I think what we come across constantly is that, the parents are like, well, math is super important. If my kid can't do math, they can't get a job. They can't go to school. They can't go to college. They can't live in the real world if they can't do math. And then what they're trying to get them to do is multiplication tables super fast. I'm like, hey, that's an entry-level job they can do right there if they can count real quick. So what do you see is something that you'd like to change, or something that you've been thinking about that really is, a movement you'd like to go towards in math education?
Yeah, math in particular is that one goofy spot where I was guilty of evaluating it completely differently than any other class that I taught. So being a grade 7 and 8 teacher, I was a homeroom teacher who taught all subject areas. And math was the only area where I would score kids based on a quantity of correct answers. And as a phys ed teacher, I also thought, okay, wait a second. I don't put all my kids on the foul line and grade them based on how many foul shots they're going to make out of 10, because they're all going to fail. So why am I doing the same thing in math? And I also think that our approach to math instruction is often kids who can recall math facts quickly and accurately are good math students. And I think we have to redefine math student. And I don't even want to use the word good as an adjective, because it implies we have a bad math student, and that's not the message I want to send. We have a classroom full of math students who I want to focus on the process of learning. The end product is important too, but map out how you got there, because we're all going to get there in very different ways. And the more we provide these sandbox tools like Scratch, like Minecraft, the less we look at quantifying repetitive work. Multiplication tables are super crucial and super important, but one's ability to memorize them and recall them and spit out those facts quickly isn't really going to put them any further ahead than the next student who can't but knows how to pull it up on the phone just as quickly, so to speak. So I think it's our evaluation is the biggest shift that needs to occur, particularly in a math classroom. And I know I'm going to take some heat for this. There's a lot of people out there that are pro data and pro repetitive rote learning in math. But, we learn to spell so that we can write words, so we can write sentences, so we can write poetry. And multiplication tables are important, but let's use that to find the volume of the cylinder of the drain tube at the end of my road that goes into the beach, because it keeps plugging with sand. There's an authentic task I want my grade 8s to solve.
Something that you just said really kind of hit to the core of something that I'm kind of trying to change district-wide now that I'm a K-8 math coach. Just so you know, I also taught 7th and 8th grade math for a very long time. And, there's all these ancillary math activities like computer coding, you have robotics, you have, science and some of the great things you do in science class. And I feel like math as a subject is kind of left over with like just these procedural kind of standards that are just taught you have to know these standards, you have to know these standards, and all the kind of cool ancillary things that you do with math are kind of shoved off in different classes and different experiences, and math kind of is kind of left with all the stuff that's quote unquote kind of boring to teach. When we could open the gates of it and open it up a little bit and treat it a little bit more, less like you said, like a memorization subject, and more like an application subject. Tell me, how can you apply this? Do a little bit more project-based learning. To be very honest, you can have kind of this mantra and everything, but you have some math teachers, especially kind of as you're going up in grades, that are firmly rooted in front of that room. And really, when it comes to bringing in some of the more fun things in math and all that stuff, they come back every time and say, I've got these standards to cover, and there's no time for that fun, and there's no time for project-based learning. I guess my question is how do you approach that teacher who kind of, has those typical excuses where, I have this curriculum to cover, and, we don't have time for, to do cool stuff in math class. I guess my general question is how do you go to that teacher who, might be struggling with some of these things and some of these concepts of, bringing in more project-based learning and really bringing in more technology and saying, this is the future, and, wake up. And, how do you kind of reach that teacher who's really struggling to take this over?
I've learned that because I was that teacher. I started teaching that way. That's the school system I went to, and we teach from our own reference points. So I started teaching that way, and it didn't work for me. What I've learned is the stronger the open-ended task is, the more time I'm finding myself in math able to do lots of really cool things. When I used to be by the textbook, following it day by day by day by day, I was teaching isolated expectations. One day it's this, the next day it's that, and at the end of the week I can check all these boxes showing that I covered all of this math curriculum. And one day I decided I don't even like the word cover, because it can also mean to conceal. I want kids to discover curriculum, and I'm a big advocate for constructivist learning. So I'll give you one really, really big example that stuck out for me. I had 3 boys in my class about 3 years ago, grade 8 students going to high school. We stream our kids here in high school, so they're headed to what we call a college stream in high school. We've got a university and a college stream, so to speak, and they're heading to this college stream. So they really excelled with that hands-on approach. And one day during Genius Hour, we were doing at the time, Genius Hour was still a scheduled event, which is something I've moved away from. But at the time, they were working on a lawnmower motor. It was a grade 8 class. They wanted to take apart this lawnmower motor. They're going to take a lot of shop classes in high school, and they wanted to do this in grade 8. So my principal gave them permission. If we dump all the gas out of it, dump the oil out of it, no problem. You guys have at it. You want to take apart this motor. This is what you're going to do in life. This is what you're going to do in high school. So why wouldn't we let you do this in grade 8? Long story short, I teach circles in grade 8 here in Ontario, and I teach viscosity in science. So all of a sudden, these kids are talking about a 24-inch lawnmower deck. And then all of a sudden, we're talking about the diameter of the blade and what that means. And we're talking about RPMs. And we're talking about, why does the oil cap say 5W30 on it? What's the difference between 5W and 10W30 oil? And now we're talking about viscosity. And when I think about that lesson, it wasn't even my lesson. It was 3 boys that wanted to take apart a lawnmower motor, and I ended up hitting about 9 curriculum expectations just with them, and they'll never forget it. That was such an authentic experience in terms of viscosity and circumference. They won't ever forget that. And so when I started step back and look at what these kids are interested in and discover the curriculum rather than me cover the curriculum, it honestly freed up my time. It made more math minutes.
See, that's one of the things I love hearing the most. That's truly those make it real moments, that instant relevance moment of seeing what a kid is passionate about and saying, I can just go with this and we can learn. And we're not going to try to say, you know what, you're really super interested in this. I'm teaching you circles in 2 months, so let's pull this back up then. You took it right when it mattered to them, and it's the using today's experiences to teach tomorrow's lessons. You just said, right now, these kids are in this. Let's use it while they're passionate about it and while they're learning it. Because maybe you thought, hey, I know all this circle stuff. I know all this viscosity stuff. And some teachers will be in your position and say, this is going to be great. And then all of a sudden they're just like throwing learning at the kids. They're throwing lessons at them. They're throwing more practice, more problems. Like, no. You're getting ahead of the game. You need to somehow partner alongside with these kids as they're learning, as they need this, as they reveal it. And with that situation, like taking apart a motor, that's what's exciting about it is it's not like you unscrew one thing and then all of a sudden all the parts are on the floor in front of you. It's procedural. It's one piece at a time. It's taking its time to get through, and so it slows down their need to learn something about the next piece, something about the next question, because it's built into a slower process. And I am trying, and I'm looking for that opportunity here in the States as much as I can, in my districts as I work, to find those locations where we can say to the teachers are ready to say to kids, we're going to separate testing, learning, our class time, our restrictive school schedule, and say, these are the things we need to learn. And we are all here to help you learn these things when it is, most interesting and most appropriate and most, sequential to work this way. And we can have kids learn through what they're thinking, what they're interested in more and more, and less about that, the memorization of facts. It goes to what you said the last time about, you learn words so that you can write poetry. And that idea of math fluency is being able to quickly recall facts, which it's not. That's automaticity. And I can memorize every single word in the German language, but that doesn't mean I can speak German. It just means that I know all the words. And we're trying to teach our kids to become fluent speakers of mathematics and problem solvers in mathematics. And that's going to require conversations that are mathematical, which means time spent thinking and working. And I appreciate what you did there with taking those kids and saying, yes, we can engage with what you love. And, oh, what do you know? I can see some other stuff behind here that we can really make sure that you're learning the things they need to learn. It changes the nature of the teaching profession from content deliverer to true deep understander of your students' learning progress and concepts, and helping them as that step-by-step help along the way. So no, what you really hit on something that's a major powerful message for the two of us here today. So Brian, I want to make sure that our listeners know exactly where to find you and exactly how they can connect with you on all of your favorite platforms of social media. So you want to let them know that information about you?
Absolutely, yeah. If you're interested in my CV, it's mraspinall.com. My blog is brianaspinall.com. I'm on Twitter at Mr. Aspinall, and I'm on Instagram at Mr.Aspinall.
That's great, and I'm looking forward to that new book coming out. Any preview on when that's going to come out?
Yeah, we're looking at about March right now. The edits are finished in the next week or so. I was really hoping, honestly, to push it to Hour of Code Week. I thought it would be awesome to almost release it a year after Codebreaker to the day, but I didn't get my act in gear, and so we're looking at about March right now. But early 2019 is my goal.
Well, that sounds great, and I'm sure everybody's looking forward to that. And now I'm going to go on with our American Thanksgiving here, and now I'm going to have all these memories of going to Windsor in college to think about, because you brought up Windsor for the first time in a very long time. So,
well, beautiful downtown Windsor. I spent a lot of nights down there, too. I went to the University of Windsor, which is literally almost right underneath the Ambassador Bridge that connects Detroit and Windsor.
Brian, I think I gotta hang up off of this thing and let the two of you catch up on some old times here. So thank you for being here with us on the Instant Relevance Podcast, and for sharing your perspectives and your ideas with our listeners and our audience. And we are, like we said, we're super excited to see what you do and the release of your new book. And if we can be any help in that, we will be sharing and sharing ideas and learning from you as we go along. So once again, thanks for being our guest.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for having me on.